$5,000 for your head alone.
$5,000? For me? Can I turn myself in?
Arthur Morgan became one of the greatest video game protagonists of all time and one of, if not the most detailed open worlds ever crafted. And due to his nature as an outlaw, that means there are plenty of kills to count along the way. Before getting into this epic western, here are some ground rules first. I'm only doing the main storyline. There is a ton of side content in this game, so to keep things simple, I'm sticking to the campaign. However, there are optional honor missions I'll partake in since those feel more important to Arthur's storyline. I'll also count animals as they are an important aspect of the game and deserve to be counted alongside humans. Random events such as being jumped on the road will also be counted. And lastly, there are times where I will have to make a choice on Arthur's behalf, so I will choose based on what I think Arthur himself would do in that scenario. If you don't agree, just let me know down in the comments. There's dozens of hours to cover, so let's saddle up.
Suppose we'll have to keep heading east.
East? Into all that's civilization.
The game opens in the year 1899 with some text letting us know the old lawless West is dying. It cuts to a heavy blizzard pounding away at Arthur's gang, but luckily he found some shelter for them to set up in. One of their group dies due to some injuries he sustained in a job gone wrong in the town of Blackwater. The gang is led by Dutch, who aims to take Arthur back out into the storm to search for one of the two men he sent out to scout ahead. They eventually locate Micah.
No, God!
Who located an occupied homestead that the three of them check out. Dutch tells them to hide out of sight while he approaches the home, but it's way more than just a family living there, and Micah finds a body stashed in the wagon he's behind. Sensing Dutch is in danger, the two of them open fire, with Arthur clocking his first 5 kills of the game against the rival O'Driscoll gang. One escapes and runs into the storm, but instead of going after him, Dutch reckons the storm will take him instead, so they search the property for supplies. Arthur goes to examine the barn and gets jumped, but easily subdues the weaker fella and beats on him a bit to find out their leader Colm O'Driscoll is set up nearby and plans to rob a train coming through in a couple of days. Arthur can choose to kill this man or let him go, but echoing Dutch's earlier decision, he allows the man to flee into the storm. He's not the final surprise of the night as Micah harasses a woman inside the house that requires Dutch to intervene. Her husband is the body out in the wagon, and now that she's left with nothing, Dutch intends to help her out by bringing her back to the camp. The next morning, Arthur is asked by Abigail to go find John Marston, the other man Dutch sent out to scout ahead. And even though he really doesn't want to, he accepts after Hosea Matthews tasks him and Javier to go looking for him. They find his dead horse with him not too far away. He's hurt pretty bad after getting attacked by wolves, but Arthur puts them down on their way back to camp, with Arthur's horse even getting in on the action. While John recovers, Dutch leads a group out to the O'Driscoll location despite Arthur's protest, and they confirm Colm has them set up there. They sneak down closer to their rivals and open fire, with Arthur taking down a total of 17 members of the O'Driscolls. They steal their explosives and plans for the train robbery, but on their way back to camp, they locate a straggler that Arthur lassos and takes back with him. The next day, Arthur and Charles go out hunting to help feed their people and successfully bring 2 deer back with them. With the food situation less dire, Dutch brings his guys out to the railroad so they can rob that train. Arthur helps Bill set up the explosives, but when the time comes, they don't go off. This forces them to pivot and jump aboard the train, with only Arthur landing cleanly. Javier bounces off and Lenny needs help up. With his assistance, they move up the train and fight off the guards on board, earning 6 more kills before Arthur fights the conductor, who gets thrown off, and since we don't get confirmation he died, we'll leave him off the count. Arthur pulls the brakes and immediately gets back into action as more guards deboard and continue the fight. The rest of the gang catches up and they use TNT to blow the doors off the car containing the valuables. 3 guys are ushered out while they dig through the goods and find some bonds worth selling. After handing those to Dutch, he gives Arthur the choice of keeping the 3 men alive or killing them, and since their previous job in Blackwater went awry, Arthur doesn't want to leave any loose ends and takes their lives. Finally, the snow thaws enough for them to leave the mountains and get into less harsh land, so the gang leaves and sets up at the Horseshoe Overlook. A couple weeks go by and Arthur along with Uncle head into the nearby town of Valentine with Karen, Tilly, and Mary Beth, who want a small taste of civilization so they can try to earn some money. Arthur takes a nap after some shopping and is woken by Mary Beth, who heard about some rich folk taking a train they could rob. Arthur then has to intervene to help both Tilly and Karen against a couple less than gentlemanly idiots, and once they're all back together, a stranger speaks up asking if Arthur was in Blackwater recently. Arthur tries to tell him otherwise, but he takes off knowing he's spotted one of Dutch's men. men, which prompts a chase that winds up with the man falling off his horse and holding on for dear life. Here's another choice, and due to them wanting to put Blackwater behind them, Arthur stomps on the dude's fingies and sends him plummeting down the cliff. Arthur meets Javier at the Valentine bar and shows his riz.
Oh, I didn't know I was talking to a lady.
Bill drunkenly stumbles in and shoulder checks a stranger, which leads to a brawl that results in Arthur nearly killing a man in the mud. Josiah Trelawney pops up saying he looked for them in Blackwater, but it was apparent they are very wanted men out there. He confirms one of their own, Sean McGuire, is being held captive there, which means Dutch wants Arthur to find a way to free him. Before doing so, he needs to go check on Reverend Swanson, who was last spotted at a train station. He's still there, but is barely able to function because of the vast amounts of alcohol in his system. So while Arthur sits down for some cards, he doesn't notice him crawling away. He only plays a few hands and sets out to find the Reverend, who is being roughed up a little ways away. Arthur fights on his behalf and, based on the nearby shepherd's words, kills the man in the fight. The shepherd runs away, and after a brief chase, Arthur threatens the man into keeping silent and stealing his shit. He notices the Reverend walking on the tracks up above and rushes up there to save his measly life and bring him back to the camp. When he gets back, Hosea requests Arthur's presence on a hunting trip as they track down a massive 1,000-pound bear. They have to camp for the night, which has Arthur use a bow to kill a rabbit for dinner. The following morning, they pack up and track the bear's location, setting bait that lures it out. It takes a few bullets to the face and runs away, but succeeds in scaring Hosea's old ass so badly he calls off hunting forever. After that, Arthur meets up with Javier and Charles outside of Blackwater, where Trelawney joins them with intel. Sean is set to be moved up the river and transferred to a federal prison further west, which gives them ample opportunity to rescue him. Charles splits off while the others track the boat. Once they disembark, Trelawney volunteers to cause a distraction so Javier and Arthur can sneak up and kill the two guys still by the boat. But further up, Arthur's spurs rattle a bit too loudly, alerting the bounty hunters to their presence and causing a large shootout that adds 13 bodies to the count. They track the remaining guys to a camp that results in 5 more kills before Arthur cuts Sean down.
You're a lot less ugly from that other angle, Arthur.
While they go back to camp, Arthur stays behind to loot the place, but runs into 4 lawmen that require killing. Back at the Overlook, Arthur talks to Kieran, the O'Driscoll feller that Arthur lassoed in the mountains, and after some threats to make him a eunuch, he agrees to accompany him, John, and Bill to lead them to Combs' location. There's definitely plenty of his gang there, but Kieran claims Combs should be inside the cabin, so Arthur, Bill, and John use teamwork to take out guys quietly. Things get loud after that as the 3 of them open fire on the unsuspecting gang of outlaws, with Arthur tacking on another 12 kills. Arthur goes to check the cabin but gets surprised by someone else inside, and ends up getting saved by Kieran himself, who says he wants to join their gang and hates Colm O'Driscoll anyway. Back at the camp, Arthur and Dutch's conversation is interrupted by a panicked Lenny who says Micah was arrested in the town of Strawberry. Arthur just wants to leave him there, but Dutch again requests he try and free him. Before doing so, Arthur and Lenny get blasted in Valentine and have a slap fight. After sleeping off the hangover, Arthur rides out to Strawberry where 3 O'Driscolls attempt to rob him and die for their efforts. When he gets into town, he confirms with the sheriff that Micah was captured and locates him behind bars out back. He taunts him a little bit and pulls the bars out using a nearby machine. The noise brings the law around, and with Micah refusing to leave town until he settles a score, this mission brings Arthur the largest bump in kills yet, with 23 guys getting shot dead. Next, Arthur does some money retrieval for Leopold Strauss, who specializes in lending money to people who don't want to pay it back. None of these lead to any kills, but the last guy he visits is dying, so the only thing he can pay back is the blood he spits into Arthur's face. When he's back at camp, he finds a letter from his previous lover Mary Linden, who is in Valentine and needs his help. So he rides out and kills 3 O'Driscolls and a horse of theirs on his way. He gets there to find she's single now, but her little brother Jamie ran off with a religious cult that she hopes Arthur can help him get out of. The cult leader attempts to shield Jamie from Arthur, but fails to shield his own neck, which is crushed under his fingers. Jamie rides off with Arthur on his tail until he eventually catches up and shoots the firearm right out of his hand. He brings him back to Mary, who obviously still has love for Arthur, but gets on the train knowing he'll continue to be an outlaw. Arthur rides out to Emerald Ranch and meets up with Hosea, who is auditioning for a job so they can keep regular money coming in. Seamus wants them to steal a stagecoach from a cousin he despises, so they ride out in the night and Arthur sneaks into the house to steal their cash while Hosea gets to the coach. They ride it back to Seamus, who agrees to keep working with them as long as they can discreetly bring him items like this. They go back to camp together, where John tells Arthur he wants to rob that train full of fat cats Mary Beth heard about and thinks if they can steal an oil wagon and park it on the tracks, then any sane conductor will stop to avoid being blown up.
You might be the first bastard to ever have half his brains eaten by a wolf and end up more intelligent.
Arthur steals a wagon, but 4 guards at the refinery pursue him and each earn bullets in their heads. After stashing the wagon out of sight, Arthur links up with John back at camp and suggests he hire Charles to assist with a job. But when he gets to the wagon, he finds Sean there demanding to be part of it. They park the wagon on the tracks and Arthur shows the other 3 men his balls by standing atop the wagon to ensure the train stops. Most of the yuppies hand over their goods, but a few need some convincing. However, the luggage car contains 4 guards that Arthur saves Sean from. But the action doesn't stop there because the law shows up and demands they turn themselves in. But these guys don't know who they're messing with and 10 fall by Arthur's itchy trigger finger. He rolls back into camp where Abigail asks Arthur to take her son Jack out to do something since his father is nowhere to be found. They go down to the river and we see a sweet part of Arthur as he treats the kid with kindness and teaches him how to fish. The first couple are too small to take with us, but the third is a nice bass that's caught and brought back to camp for food. Jack got bored of fishing and shows Arthur that pretty necklace he made, and it's so gosh darn amazing a couple strangers show up to admire it as well. These Pinkertons know Arthur and urge him to turn Dutch in if he wants to live, but he tells them to frick off in front of the kid, and they return to camp so Arthur can relay the news to Dutch. Afterwards, he meets Micah out west a ways and tags along on a bank coach robbery that sees 6 of their guards go down. They take the entire coach, and suddenly the robbers become the robbed as O'Driscolls ambush them and destroy the coach. They pay dearly for their actions, however, with Arthur gunning down 14 of them while Micah cleans up the others. They bust open the lockbox to find a fair amount of cash within and part ways so Arthur can link up with John and Valentine to earn even more. They ride outside of town and scare off some guys in order to steal their sheep and herd them into town for auction. From there, Arthur meets Dutch at the saloon and their time is cut short when this motherfucker named Leviticus Cornwall arrives all angry about Dutch stealing things from him. His men hold Strauss and John hostage, so the 2 outlaws step out right as Cornwall runs away like a little beach. Arthur slows down time and quickly guns down the 5 men in front of them and spends the next few intense minutes fighting off what feels like the entire town of Valentine to clock 41 kills in all. They hurry an injured Strauss back to camp while Arthur stays behind to make sure no one follows, then heads out to a new prospective camping spot with Charles to scope it out. They locate a dead body there along with a seemingly abandoned camp, but a trio of scared Germans are found under a wagon. Their little camp got raided and their father taken hostage. So Charles uses his tracking expertise to lead them to a much better camping option and locates the German fellow. However, some dumbasses come at them and earn their death as a result. After settling into their new spot in the muggy south, Dutch gathers Hosea and Arthur to do some fishing and relax for a while. But on their way to the creek, they run into Trelawney who got himself arrested. Dutch talks to the sheriff to see about releasing him, but while they're distracted, the other troublemakers pick the lock and make a run for it. Arthur helps the law corral these men and takes them into the nearby town of Rhodes. Due to their help, the sheriff agrees to release Trelawney into their custody, and they discuss some business in town regarding the 2 wealthy families, the Grays and the Braithwaites. Dutch tasks Hosea and Arthur with finding some intel on them for possible money-making opportunities, and then asks Arthur if he still wants to go fishing, but he declines and watches as Hosea obliterates this poor woman with his horse. He goes back to camp for some respite and instead breaks up a fight between Mr. Pearson and Sadie, who has been delegated to working with him after she was saved from the O'Driscolls back in the mountains. She's sick of him and wants to do something else, so Arthur brings her into town to do some shopping. On their way back, some raiders approach their wagon demanding a toll for passing through, so Sadie shoots the feller and they fight off the rest for 6 kills. Arthur loves the sass and tells her he'll ride with her again anytime before he approaches Strauss, who has more debt collection to pass on to him. Arthur is able to obtain payment from the first guy and has to ride all the way to Strawberry for the second. The man tells Arthur he's tracking a white cougar, but Arthur says his mom has been dead for years. They enter the cave and split up, with the other guy dying and Arthur having to kill the cougar himself to sell the pelts. He rides all the way back to Rhodes where he meets Dutch and Bill at the sheriff's station. Sheriff Gray is drunk as hell and foolishly deputizes the trio of outlaws so they can assist Deputy Archibald with taking down some moonshiners. They assist with arresting them and Arthur blows up their operation, which pisses off the nearby Lemoyne Raiders who were looking to buy the product. That leads to a shootout between them, Arthur, and Bill that adds 8 more kills. As a reward, the deputy gifts the men most of the moonshine that they take back to camp. Probably wishing he stayed behind to chug some of that down, Arthur instead meets Beau Gray on their massive plantation and takes on the task of messenger boy. This turns into a sneaking mission, as Arthur uses the cover of fog to deliver the letter to Penelope Braithwaite. With the 2 of them in a Romeo and Juliet situation, Arthur is given yet another letter, but this one worries Beau greatly. Penelope intends to march in the women's suffrage rally and he believes that will make her a target for the old-fashioned men in town. Arthur attends the rally and acts as their driver until they form a mob outside the bank to begin their speech. But Beau's cousin approaches looking to make some trouble, so at Penelope's request, Arthur takes him away. After doing that, Arthur rides back to camp to talk to Hosea, who wants Arthur to join him on a trip to the Braithwaite estate. He intends to sell their moonshine back to them, and despite Catherine Braithwaite knowing damn well they stole it, she values messing with the Gray family even more than dealing with a couple of thieves. She pays up and has them take the moonshine into town and give it away for free at the tavern owned by the Gray family. The Lemoyne Raiders crash the party to try and get revenge for their theft, but instead make the tavern their final resting place. They flee the tavern and face off against more riders, giving Arthur a chance to bump his count up even more between the 11 raiders and the 3 horses caught up in the violence. Hosea says he'll give the remaining moonshine back to Catherine to try and stoke a nice working relationship with the family. So Arthur goes back to camp to find Dutch and Micah scheming. Like Mac and It's Always Sunny, they want to play both sides to come out on top, and escalate the feud between the Grays and Braithwaites while they rob both families blind. Arthur dips out right then and finds John and Javier talking to the Elder Gray, who wants them to steal some prized horses from the Braithwaites. He claims they could be sold for $5,000, which is around $188,000 today. So that's a quick yes on their part. They ride to the Braithwaites and Arthur takes down the stable hand, so they can steal the 3 horses, but their little operation is found out and leads to the Braithwaites having 12 vacant positions on their payroll. They take them to Clemens Cove, but get a mere fraction of what Old Man Gray promised they'd get. Arthur ends up going back there to meet Hosea, who sends Sean and Arthur out to the Gray residence to cause them a bit of financial trouble by burning their tobacco crop. Arthur hides in the back of the moonshine wagon until they come to a stop out of sight, and Sam Fisher's the lone guard. They wait for the cover of night, so Sean makes some Molotovs in the meantime, and the two split up to douse the farm in moonshine so the flames spread quickly. They link up afterwards and set their barn and crop ablaze, then fight off the night guard during their escape. Back at camp, Dutch has Arthur track down Trelawney and question him about some bounty hunters he heard are scouting the area. But when him and Charles get to his caravan near town, they find he's missing. They track him to a couple fellas playing dumb about his location, like his fucking cane isn't sitting right there out in the open. So Arthur KOs one of them and brutally questions the other to find out Trelawney was taken to a cabin near the Braithwaite Manor. Arthur wails on him until his soul leaves his body as payment for wasting their time, and they catch the bounty hunters dragging Trelawney out of the cabin. They scamper off and try to use the fields as cover, but Arthur puts 2 of them down. One lassos that thick neck of his and attempts to persuade Charles into leaving him be, and earns a blade in his heart instead. The final 2 fire at them from the barn, but are much worse shots than Arthur Morgan. They gather Trelawney to bring him back to camp, and it's not much longer until he's back in action and leading Arthur to a stagecoach robbery that goes smoothly without any deaths. At camp, Molly wants to talk to Arthur about Dutch, but is quickly interrupted by Uncle with promises of wealth. He claims to have a lead on a wagon passing nearby carrying payroll without guards, but Arthur will only do the job if Uncle quits being a lazy son of a bitch and tags along. He reluctantly agrees, and they rush to the wagon to find out they're stealing more of Leviticus Cornwall's cash again. Mere seconds after they have the cash in hand, Cornwall's men come screaming down the road and give chase to Arthur, Uncle, Charles, and Bill. Arthur headshots a dude and a horse by accident, but there's too many men to win this battle, so they break off into the woods and hide out in a random barn until nighttime. Just when they think the coast is clear, Cornwall's men come knocking, and the homeowner confesses he's heard some noises out in the barn, which inevitably leads to more violence that bumps Arthur's kill total over 300. After some rest, Arthur and Lenny team up to check out reports of some brain-dead troglodytes that refuse to believe the Civil War is over, and are holed up in a bayou out east with a stash of weapons and cash. There's dynamite and a goddamn Gatling gun on site, but there's still no match for Sniper Arthur, who uses their own TNT against them to tally up 20 more kills. They find a stash of weapons they can use and sell, and on their way out, Arthur domes 3 more of them for good measure. They drop the weapons at the camp, and Bill approaches, saying they have unfinished business in Valentine and need to rob that bank. Arthur is hesitant to do it, but with the score being big enough, he'll get the job done. However, Strauss stops him on his way out and asks him to collect money from Mrs. Downs now that her husband is dead. Bill, Arthur, Lenny, and Karen go all the way to Valentine and start the job, with Karen pretending to be a drunken harlot to distract the guys inside so that the 3 men can catch them unawares. Arthur gets into the vault and begins cracking each deposit box inside, netting thousands in cash without even killing anyone. The peace doesn't last long, however, and they're fired upon right as they get to their horses. This leads to a hectic chase that has Arthur killing 8 lawmen before the train cuts the rest off. They separate, and Arthur goes to collect the debt from Mrs. Downs now that her blood-spewing husband is in the ground. Once he gets back to camp, Micah informs him of a possible treaty with the O'Driscolls, with Mr. Pearson claiming he met some in town that want to parlay. Dutch agrees to it, and Arthur sets up on a hill to look out using his sniper, but winds up getting jumped and shot by the O'Driscolls. He wakes up injured in a cellar with Como Driscoll telling him he kidnapped Arthur to bring Dutch and their whole gang out so he can lure them into a trap where the law awaits them. Once he's alone, Arthur is able to escape his bonds and kills a single O'Driscoll on his way out. He climbs his horse and rides it back to camp where he's treated by the gang and has to recover for a few weeks. Once he's good to go, he heads into Rhodes to accompany Bill, Micah, and Sean to a meeting with the Gray family to discuss a business opportunity. But as they walk down the street, they get a funny feeling, with Sean getting the brunt of it. The Grays set up an ambush that forces the other three into a gunfight that nets Arthur 21 more kills on the streets of Rhodes. They find Bill's nowhere in sight, and that's because the sheriff was able to take him hostage and has the nerve to show his face. Arthur uses his time-warping ability to shoot Sheriff Gray's face clean off alongside another man, while Micah takes down the two on the right. Gunfire is loud, but clearly not as loud as the dogs in this city. Arthur scolds them for being stupid enough to accept this meeting and expresses regret over Sean's death. He tells Micah he's a little piece of shit and to get out of his face before riding back to camp to find out Jack Marston has been abducted by the Braithwaites. This starts what is the most iconic mission in the game, as Dutch promises Abigail and John he'll get their boy back. The gang rolls onto the estate in this awesome shot of their approach, and Dutch calls the uncooperative Braithwaites out to begin the firefight that adds another 10 kills for Arthur. While searching the home for Jack, one guy hiding in the library gets blasted to Kingdom Come, and the gang faces off against even more incoming guards coming down the road. Once they're eliminated, John and Arthur bust through the final locked room in the house, and the last two Braithwaites are brained using Deadeye. Catherine is dragged out and questioned, but she initially doesn't tell them shit until Dutch pulls her out of the house to see all the dead people alongside her now burning manor. She tells them her sons handed Jack over to a man named Angelo Bronte out of St. Denis. So the gang departs and leaves Catherine to her own devices, which I guess means running into her own burning house. The next morning, while discussing Jack, the Pinkertons roll in and tell Dutch if he turns himself in, then his gang goes free. But they're all loyal to Mr. Vanderland and refuse to back down. He tells them he'll return with even more men and kill them all, so the gang packs up and heads towards the old house in the bayou that Arthur and Lenny visited earlier to nab those guns. Arthur takes John out there to make sure it's still cleared out, and along the way, John expresses frustration with how things have gone for them and sees no end in sight. Arthur reassures him and promises they'll get Jack back, but they just need to utilize this new place for a few days to keep away from the Pinkertons. Arthur removes the remaining squatters and tosses them in the swamp, so John can lead the rest of the gang there. Dutch ignores Molly in favor of riding out to St. Denis with Arthur to do some scouting. They split up, but eventually find themselves at the same saloon where Dutch admits his smooth talk didn't get him anywhere. The bartender suggests that Arthur leave it alone, but the guy next to him says the kids out in the alley should know where to find Angelo Bronte. These little shits promise info for cash and instead rob Arthur, which leads to a long chase that gets Arthur surrounded by a bunch more armed children if he's unable to catch the kid. The leader smacks the thief to give us some sort of satisfaction and winds up returning the satchel and telling Arthur where he can find Angelo Bronte. He informs Dutch, who goes to grab John so they can confront Bronte together. They convince their way inside, and Angelo Bronte seems insulted by their presence, but suddenly changes tune and offers drinks. He admits he has Jack, but asks Dutch to stay with him while Arthur and John take care of some grave robbers for him. They search the place and after a couple minutes find themselves getting shot at, which earns Arthur 5 kills. He makes sure to grab their stash and John leads the way as they sneak out to avoid the law investigating the gunshots. They return to Bronte's residence where Jack awaits and tells everyone of the great Italian food he ate and all the fun he had. Dutch informs Arthur that they've been invited to a big party at the mayor's house where they can possibly get some intel on ways to make more money. Back at camp, everyone celebrates Jack's return, but Arthur is business as usual and is assigned yet another debt collection task by Strauss that has Arthur getting stabbed and having to KO the man and scare his son into handing over the money. After getting another letter from Mary, he rides back to Saint Denis and is stopped by a brother named Dorklin, who tells Arthur of a supposed human trafficking front in the nearby market. Arthur intimidates the man into revealing the hidden door and frees the two men chained up downstairs. He offloads them onto the brother and heads to the hotel Mary is staying at, but quickly regrets it when she asks asks for his help with her bitch-ass dad. He accompanies her anyway to find out his drinking and gambling is getting worse, so she leads him to his last known location, and this young and dumb man tries telling Arthur to get
Out of here!
Mary and her father emerge from his den of sin, and he yells about the embarrassment she makes him feel. So they stalk him through the streets and witness him selling a brooch that once belonged to Mary's mother, which makes her irate. But not as irate as her dad when he sees Big Dick Arthur walk around that corner and promises to get the brooch back. After convincing the man to give it back, he hands it over and they go on a lovely date to the theater. Before they part ways, she begs Arthur to run away with her, but his obligations to Dutch and the gang are too strong, so he promises he'll be with her once he settles things. Before going back to camp, Brother Dorkland stops him to introduce him to his sister, who promptly has her crucifix jacked by one of the many street rats in the city. Arthur chases him and sees him on the verge of getting hit by a grown man. So after threatening him, the guy lets him go and Arthur takes the crucifix back to the sister. Back at camp, Arthur talks to Mary Beth about romance, but is interrupted by Susan because Tilly was kidnapped by the gang she used to run with before them. Her and Arthur set out to a known hideout of the Foreman brothers, and she dispatches their lone lookout. Arthur goes inside and takes out the two men in there and frees Tilly, who says the others went out back. They chase them down and kill the first two, and hogtie Anthony Foreman so Tilly can determine his fate. She just wants him and his brothers to leave her alone, but Arthur ultimately gets to choose here. He honors Tilly's wish and lets him go, then attends a party alongside Dutch, Hosea, and Bill at the mayor's house in Saint Denis. They roll up looking fly as fuck and find Angelo Bronte overlooking the party from the balcony. He points out a few notable and powerful people attending the party and his disdain for each and every one of them. They split off from that toxic dude, and Arthur introduces himself to the mayor and overhears some business he has with Leviticus Cornwall. He follows his head of staff and steals a letter he locked away and links back up with the gang. Hosea overheard some intel on how stacked the bank is in the city, whereas Dutch was told about a trolley station loaded with cash and a high-stakes poker game taking place soon. They leave the party and discuss upcoming plans with the first money-making opportunity taking place on a riverboat. Arthur meets Trelawney in town so he can look smart for the poker game. They get to the boat with a plan. Arthur will play poker at an advantage as the dealer is in Trelawney's pocket, and Strauss will set up in a position to provide guidance to Arthur. Arthur cleans out their pockets and follows the pit boss up to the safe alongside Javier, who is posing as a regular-ass employee. He KOs the lone guard and Arthur disarms the pit boss so he can empty the safe, but the guy has a second gun on him and pulls a fast one, but not as fast as Arthur. They play it cool and head back downstairs, but it's only a matter of time until they're found out, and that leads to 8 more deaths. They jump overboard and swim ashore to split up the cash. Back in the city, Arthur is formally introduced to the 2 natives he saw at the mayor's party. They continue to experience betrayal by the US government, and this time it's courtesy of Cornwall, who wants to dig for oil on their land. He meets Eagle out near the oil fields and has to sneak into the factory to obtain an incriminating letter from an office on the 2nd floor. He beats the information out of the foreman up there and gets the letter, but when he attempts to sneak out, he's caught by some guards. Eagle causes a distraction by lighting some of that oil on fire, which gives Arthur the chance he needs to escape and guns down 13 of Cornwall's employees. He exchanges the letter for cash and wishes Eagle flies luck, then goes back to camp where Dutch pulls him away from Sadie to discuss the trolley station job. While they talk it over, they spot Kieran's mutilated body trouncing in atop a horse, and droves of O'Driscolls follow soon after. This leads into a massive battle that provides a large bump in kills as Arthur puts down 42 O'Driscolls while defending their camp. After they cool down, Arthur, Dutch, and Lenny go to Saint Denis to rob the trolley station. However, it becomes apparent very quickly that Bronte gave them a false lead to set them up. They run out back and hop aboard a trolley where Arthur hangs out and shoots 12 lawmen while on rails. After about a minute of that, Arthur tries to slow the trolley down, but the brakes have gone out and they crash violently and spill into the streets to fight off a hell of a lot more police to get Arthur halfway to 1,000 kills. When they get back to camp, Dutch gives Arthur the deciding vote on a hit job that will end Bronte's life. Hosea thinks it's a useless revenge mission, but Dutch describes it as business. Since Bronte runs the city, he thinks killing him is essential to their success in robbing Saint Denis Bank. Arthur says if it's business, then he'll go along with it, so they ride out to the swamps to enlist the help of a man named Thomas who can take them around the back of Bronte's mansion. There aren't any kills in this mission because the legendary gator they run into takes bullet after bullet to its dinosaur face and does nothing. But afterwards, Thomas agrees to help them and rows Arthur, Dutch, John, Bill, and Lenny around the back of Bronte's mansion. They sneak in the back and get to work, with Arthur taking down 17 of Bronte's security himself. Eventually, Bronte pops up and tries tries to surprise Arthur, but his gun jams, so he resorts to throwing it and hits John Marston instead. He gets knocked out for that bullshit, and Arthur carries him downstairs so Dutch can decide what to do with him. But the police have shown up and graciously offer themselves to the kill count. They run back to the boat, and Dutch wakes Bronte up, who attempts to turn his own men against him by offering $1,000 if they kill him now. But they simply stare at Bronte like an idiot. Dutch decides to force Bronte to drink swamp water, and notices the hungry alligator asking for a snack a short ways away, so he provides a full-ass meal by tossing Bronte at him. With him dead, the gang prepares to rob the Bank of Saint Denis. Hosea and Abigail will cause a distraction which will lure the patrols near the bank elsewhere, and provide enough time for the gang to empty the vaults. The next morning, they head into town and wait across the street for Hosea's signal. The explosion goes off, and the gang barges into the bank and forces the teller to open the vault. But after just a minute, Pinkertons appear outside with Hosea captive. Agent Milton shoots Hosea in the chest, killing him, which causes the gang to open fire, with Arthur netting 13 kills on the ground level. There's too many men to contend with though, so Dutch has Arthur blow a hole open in the wall and draw their fire towards the rooftops, where Arthur continues to bump the count up. That gives the rest enough time to follow, except for John, who gets captured by the Pinkertons. The rest use the rooftops to escape, but a couple agents surprise and kill Lenny before joining him in death. They successfully evade the lawmen and hide out until nighttime, but the streets are littered with Pinkertons. They attempt to sneak onto a boat, but several agents are blocking their way. So Charles, being the absolute bamf he is, leads them on a merry chase so that Arthur, Dutch, Javier, Bill, and Micah can board that boat. Dutch introduces himself to the crew and finds out they're headed to the Caribbean and can hop off in Cuba. But a raging storm has other plans and sends the boat to the bottom of the ocean and Arthur to the shores of Guarma. He wakes up and stumbles his way across the beach until he eventually finds the crew, who wind up getting chained up by a local militia. During their trek, their armed captors are attacked from the trees, giving them a chance to undo their chains and fight back. Unfortunately, not all of them escape, since Javier is shot in the leg and can't follow. He urges them to keep going because he wants to see Arthur obtain 7 more kills. Once the violence dies down, they're introduced to the man with the coolest goddamn name ever, Hercule Fontaine, and learn that the island is ruled by a crazed tyrant that runs a sugar plantation utilizing slave labor. They use the fort near their plantation as a hideout, and he'll help arrange a boat off the island if they assist in freeing some escaped slaves. The next few missions take place on the fictional island of Guarma, as Arthur, Dutch, Bill, and Micah assist Hercule and his men with their fight against Fissar, who they saw briefly in Saint Denis. They help free some slaves and also free Javier from being tortured and imprisoned. Ultimately, Fissar figures out who they are and wants to cash in on the price over their heads, so he works with the US government to bring the Navy in and take them back home. But they fight back hard and bring Fissar down in the process. This is a short section of the game, but it provides a large bump in kills as Arthur shoots many of Fissar's men. But a single action is responsible for approximately 320 kills on its own, and that's when Arthur sinks a warship. It looks to be based on an ironclad warship like the CSS Virginia, which could hold around 320 men. We know Fissar sent everything he had at them, so that ship was likely at capacity. Their island vacation nearly gets Arthur up to 1,000 kills, but he has plenty of time for that back in Lemoyne. They sail back there and split up to find the rest of the gang. Arthur finds a letter that leads them north of Saint Denis, but he has to dodge some Pinkertons that are doing daily visits to their previous hideout. He rides out there and finds out Sadie took charge and saved everyone, but confirms John Marston is being held at Sisika Penitentiary. Dutch and the rest soon follow, but with them come the Pinkertons, who open fire. A hectic battle ensues, with Arthur decimating the agents with his own weapons and the Pinkertons' own Gatling gun. The quickness and suddenness of their assault rattles Dutch, so while he tries to figure things out, Arthur agrees to meet Sadie in Saint Denis to work out a plan to free John before he hangs. Soon after he gets into town, he's hit with a debilitating coughing fit, unlike the smaller ones that began back in Rhodes. A good Samaritan guides him to a doctor who diagnoses Arthur with tuberculosis. He basically tells Arthur he's fucked, and suggests he get to a warm, dry place and chillax till the Reaper comes for him. But he can't do that right now, and walks out of his office to reminisce a bit. This will change depending on your honor level, but since Arthur is a somewhat honorable individual, he gets the golden path, and listens to some positive quotes on his slow walk down the street. He keeps the news to himself as he gets to camp, and Dutch sends him along with Charles up north to scout out a hidden camping spot that will keep the Pinkertons off them for a while. He gathers Charles and they take a canoe out to a dangerous locale known as Murphy Country. The locals are not friendly, so they sneak their way through the hills and stalk the ultra-violent cannibalistic inbreds to their cave. With Charles's help, Arthur removes the eyes from these hills and tacks on another 14 well-deserved kills. Arthur releases their lone prisoner and escorts her back home to the town of Annisburg. On his way out, he again runs into Mrs. Downs and accidentally cockblocks this dude.
Thanks, buddy.
He rides up to the cave while the gang is setting up and learns that Cornwall recently bought into the mine in Annisburg. But before they discuss that further, good old Molly O'Shea drunkenly stumbles in and admits she's the reason why the bank robbery went wrong in Saint Denis. On that note, Arthur rides to Saint Denis and links up with Sadie, who leads him to an aeronaut outside of the city so they can fly a balloon over the prison to confirm John's presence there. The blind as shit guards finally spot them and begin shooting, and luckily for them, they have the aim of a stormtrooper, which allows them to escape and use the westerly wind to drift to Annisburg. However, in Arthur's absence, Sadie has been causing a ruckus with the O'Driscolls and is being pursued by a whole lot of them. So Arthur uses the high ground to take down 14 of them and a horse. The pilot gets shot though, which forces Arthur to take over and help Sadie by dropping a rope and pulling her out of danger. But he's an amateur and wrecks the balloon, sending them tumbling out into a ground fight with several more O'Driscolls. Knowing John is at the prison, they cook up a plan to free him while he works in the fields, so they row over to the island and sneak onto the nearest watchtower to vacate it. They're unable to confirm if John is in the chain gang, but Sadie thinks she sees him, so Arthur shoots the two guards, killing one and injuring the other. They run over and question the guard on the ground and find out John is not on work detail and behind bars currently, so they take another guard hostage and use him to demand John's release. Once he's out, they're faced with dozens of armed guards while they make their way back to the boat. So Arthur, being the calculated killer he is, pushes his personal kill count into the 1100s with 40 more deaths. When they get back to camp, Dutch is not too happy to see John because he believes they acted too quickly despite John stating there was talks of executing him. He has Arthur meet him and Micah in Annisburg to confront Cornwall, which Arthur thinks is a terrible idea. He claims it's for monetary reasons though, but actions speak louder than words here.
Good. I prefer it this way.
That action brings a lot of guns on them, putting the trio of outlaws into a precarious position as they gun their way through Annisburg and tack on 33 more kills. In the hills, Micah hands over some papers to Dutch, which reveals some details on Cornwall's company. He wants Micah, Bill, and Arthur to look into some dynamite while he cooks up a plan to steal some bonds from Cornwall's factory. From there, Arthur delays having to look at Micah's ugly mug again and reflects on things. He does a bit of good by donating food to the sister so she can help feed the poor in the city. He also finds Edith Downs again in Annisburg and attempts to offer an explanation for his bad deeds, but she doesn't want to hear it and says if he wants to do some good, then go help her son at the mines, who is being worked hard and bullied harder. Arthur wails on the foreman and tells Archie to take some cash and get his mom out of town, but she refuses to take his money and continues to sell herself to scummy men. Arthur chases him off and returns her back to her son and demands she swallow her pride and take his cash so they can start anew elsewhere. When he gets to camp, he finds a letter from Penelope Braithwaite requesting his help, so he rides out to their estate and finds she's packed her bags and is trying to leave with Beau Gray. He takes her to the train station and gets their tickets, but spots the same cousins from the women's rally coming back to prevent their leaving. Arthur steps outside and gleefully knocks the two of them out, but they aren't done yet because some of Penelope's relatives ride alongside the train with foul intent, which gives Arthur the reason he needs to do some killing. He escorts them to another station and gets them on a coach that will get them far away from their families. Arthur barely has time to settle back at camp before Strauss requests he do some more debt collecting. He's so over this kind of work, but Strauss claims no one else can do the job like him, so Arthur rides out to meet a man named J. John Weather. His wagon is broken and he's willing to hand some supplies over, but his biggest concern are the men after him. They show up in the night and Arthur takes them out. During the shootout, one of them hit the lantern on the wagon, which caught fire and ruined all the supplies. He reveals a pregnant woman hiding nearby and Arthur expresses regret for not helping with the wagon. John Weather offers his silver locket, but Arthur declines, saying his debt is forgiven and to get out of there and find someplace safe. The second guy is also named Arthur, but he finds out the man recently died and locates his widow nearby to inquire about the debt. She scolds him like they all do, so again, Arthur forgives the debt and provides some cash to help her and her son out. While heading back to camp, Arthur is jumped by 6 Murphy inbreds and has zero qualms with killing them. When he gets back, he confronts Leopold Strauss and tells him to get the fuck out, saying he brings shame to all of them for his predatory practices. After that, he's tasked with meeting Micah and Bill for another job. and due to Arthur's recent doubts in Dutch, Micah has been elevated to Dutch's bitch boy. Dutch is aiming to cause more chaos and wants to blow up a bridge so the US Army can't readily send troops into the area if needed. So Bill and Arthur ride into the rundown town of Van Horn and take out 5 men to steal their coach full of dynamite. On their trek back, some riders attack from the trees, and Arthur dispatches them quickly so as not to get blown up. They meet Micah on the road along with John, and he orders Marston to take the dynamite out to the bridge and for Arthur to meet him out there and help blow it up.
Really does think he's in charge.
While setting the dynamite, Arthur and John discuss their recent doubts in Dutch's decision making and quickly realize a lapse in their own. They think Dutch has devolved into a cold-blooded killer reveling in the violence and chaos currently, so Arthur urges John to get Abigail and Jack ready to leave when the time is right. After wiring the TNT to the bridge, they narrowly escape death and blow the bridge up to give Dutch what he wants. John mentions Abigail might know where Dutch is stashing the gang's money, and if needed, they can use that to escape. The next 3 missions don't feature any kills, as Arthur helps Eagle Flies and his father Chief Rains fall with their plight, whereas Dutch sees an opportunity to take some heat off them by having the US Army focus on the natives who continue to make their lives exponentially difficult. Arthur KOs some guards while getting the tribe's horse back and discusses fatherhood with the chief, revealing he once had a son named Isaac that was killed at a young age by some robbers. He helps the chief get some sacred items back by sneaking into an army camp undetected and continues to do good by them by stealing a smallpox vaccine the US Army is withholding from the tribe, and delivers it to Captain Monroe, who seems to be the only army man willing to help the natives. When Arthur returns to camp, he notices Josiah Trelawney packing his bags and making promises he'll return, but Arthur calls him on it and urges him to get going while things are still quiet. Shortly after that, Charles and Rainsfall ask Arthur to accompany them to a meeting with Colonel Favors, who is the one responsible for the tribe's plight. The natives are barred from carrying weapons to these meetings, but Charles and Arthur are not, so the hope is with their presence there, the colonel won't feel emboldened to be a jackass. But unfortunately that's not the case, because after a coughing fit, Arthur sits down in a tent and overhears some soldiers discussing Favor's intent to try Captain Monroe for treason, and mere moments later he attempts to do exactly that. Arthur ain't about to let that happen though, and takes a soldier hostage to allow Monroe to take off with them, but there's a lot of soldiers they need to contend with, netting Arthur 22 kills in all. He escorts Monroe to a train station and sees him off as his army career comes to a sudden end, then makes his way out to Saint Denis to watch Colm O'Driscoll's execution. They get into disguises so the authorities don't recognize them and spot some O'Driscolls in the crowd and one up on the rooftop. Arthur sneaks up there and KOs the would-be sniper. Sadie and Dutch take hold of the 2 in the crowd, and Colm realizes he won't be escaping this time, and his life is snuffed out. Sadie goes a bit batshit here and murders the 2 O'Driscolls, which prompts 10 more to come out of the woodwork for Arthur to shoot. As soon as Arthur gets to camp, Tilly hands him a letter from Mary who tells him that she has to let him go and move on. So he waltzes up to Sadie and they fucking kill the remaining members of the O'Driscoll gang, so Sadie can finally get some closure. While she departs to get her clothes dry cleaned, Arthur meets up with Dutch and Eagle Flies, who are waiting to ambush a US Army patrol to send a message. Like all of Dutch's ideas nowadays, Arthur thinks it's stupid, but goes along with it anyway and assists with setting up some charges on trees to blockade the patrol in the valley. But they didn't expect another patrol to show up soon after, leading into a prolonged battle that brings about the death of 32 US soldiers and both Dutch and Arthur getting cornered. The outlaws back up and let gravity save them from the gallows, and split up after they wash ashore a ways down the river. Arthur rides to the reservation, and after speaking with Rainsfall, learns that Eagle was taken captive by the army and is being held at their fort nearby, so he and Charles set out to free him under cover of night. They begin the mission quietly with Charles and Arthur killing guys in tandem until they find Eagle Flies and release him. But as soon as they do that, the fort goes on high alert, so they put the bow and arrows away in favor of something more loud and powerful, which nets Arthur 24 more kills on their fight out. Charles stashed some canoes by the river, which allows them to row to safety, but even that endeavor nearly kills them all between soldiers lining the river and navigating the rapids with no light. When Arthur gets back to camp, he confronts Dutch about his increasingly risky behavior, but before it goes too far, Eagle flies in with some warriors and rallies the gang to fight alongside him at Cornwall's factory. His father soon follows, begging Eagle to stop or guarantee certain death, and hearing his pleas is heartbreaking, but but it has no effect on Eagle, who rides out anyway. Dutch continues encouraging the boy and rides out too, bringing most of the gang with him. On the ride, Arthur learns that Dutch planted this idea in Eagle's mind. As part of his big plan, the US Army maintains focus on the natives instead of the Vanderlyn gang. They get to the oil field to find it on fire, so Dutch takes some men to one side while Arthur takes another, which nets an insane amount of kills in one of my favorite missions in the game. Arthur is able to save Eagle yet again, and once the fighting is over, Dutch brings Arthur into the building to search for Cornwall's bonds, which will contribute a lot towards his Tahiti dream. As they leave, more soldiers rush in, and 2 die by Arthur's hands. But before he can follow Dutch, he's blocked by some steam to the face, which allows a soldier to climb on top of him for some kinky shit, which Dutch wants no part of. Luckily, Eagle returns the favor by shooting the man, but Colonel Favors waits nearby to do the same to him, so Arthur blasts the old fool into oblivion, and goes outside to confront Dutch, who of course denies leaving him there. The survivors leave the factory pronto, with Arthur and Charles riding quickly to the reservation to get the injured Eagle Flyers back to his dad, who sadly watches him pass away. Charles stays behind to help the tribe pack up before the army rolls in to retaliate. Arthur heads back to camp but has another debilitating coughing fit, but thankfully for him, the German family he helped months ago finds him and does what they can to help him out. When he rolls into Beaver's Hollow, Dutch angrily tells him that Mr. Pearson, Uncle, and Mary Beth have fled the camp, and Arthur can't really blame them. He insists that John be able to gather his things and take Abigail and Jack too, which just pisses Dutch off. Basically, the whole gang rides into Saint Denis to begin their final train robbery. But it doesn't stop there as expected, so Arthur and a few others race alongside it and hop aboard, where 23 deaths soon follow. The last guy winds up hitting a lantern above him, with his final shot lighting fire to the car carrying munitions. While Arthur sets up an automatic gun knowing more enemies are incoming, John uncouples the blazing train right before it explodes. But he could barely turn around before getting shot, which sends him off the train and earns the perpetrator a bullet in his stupid fucking face. Dutch falls back to try and help John, while Arthur mans the Maxim gun and obliterates 20 men and 3 of their horses in the process. Using TNT, they blow a hole in the carriage carrying all the cash, and they gather up the massive bags of money and bail before the train goes for a swim in the river below. Dutch catches up and claims that he couldn't help John, which puts a damper on their successful operation. This segues directly into the final mission, with the gang riding back to camp to find out the Pinkertons abducted Abigail and took her to Van Horn to be tried for murder. Dutch agrees with Micah that they need to leave her behind and flee, and that pisses Arthur off, so he gives Tilly the cash he's carrying and tells her to take Jack to Copperhorn Landing and wait for Sadie there. He takes Sadie and they ride to Van Horn, where he snipes Pinkertons from atop a lighthouse, while Sadie rushes the building where Abigail's being held. But she's overwhelmed when she opens the door, and Arthur is forced onto ground level and fights 17 more Pinkertons to get there. In the process of cutting Abigail loose, Milton comes up from behind Arthur and tells him that Micah was a good little rat. Eventually, they tangle a bit before Abigail domes the murder-happy Pinkerton and frees Sadie. They quickly leave the town, but even more of those bastards roll in, picking up another 11 kills in doing so. Once they get out of harm's way, they stop, and Arthur transfers Abigail to Sadie's horse and regretfully informs her that John was killed or captured during the train robbery. But she still has Jack, and that Sadie will take her to him. She was able to steal Dutch's key and hands it over to Arthur, and he sets out to confront Dutch. He echoes everything Milton just told him, but Micah denies it, and they begin a standoff that John interrupts when he yells at Dutch for leaving him behind yet again. Arthur tells everyone to choose a side, and Susan quickly chooses his and just as quickly gets shot by bitch-ass Micah. Javier runs in saying the Pinkertons are storming the camp, and before the standoff can escalate any further, they open fire. Arthur and John take cover by the cave, and he's able to take down 5 Pinkertons before they run into it and climb out into the open. This leads into a hectic chase in the mountains during the night that nets Arthur another 4 Pinkerton kills, but also gets his horse killed. He comforts her before making the final choice of the game. Does he go back for the money or stick with John? Sticking with John is the only choice, since going for the money makes no sense in this scenario. Running up a mountain paired with tuberculosis-ridden lungs is not a good combo, so he stops and tells John to keep going. He'll hold off anyone coming up behind them while he meets his family at Copperhorn Landing. John does so reluctantly, and Arthur takes down another 6 men. before Micah pops up out of nowhere and still gets his ass beat by a sick man. Eventually, Dutch shows up, and after hearing Arthur tell him he gave Dutch everything he had, he turns his back to Micah and leaves on his own terms, while Micah growls angrily and runs off into the night. Arthur takes his moment to admire the sunrise before drifting off into the great beyond. If you enjoyed this, consider subscribing and goosing this video with a thumbs up. 98% of you watch but don't subscribe, so maybe do me a solid and hit that button so you'll get to see more of these videos on your feed. And that's where Arthur's life ends. He lived an eventful life as an outlaw and watched his best friend make one bad decision after another that got so many killed and dissolved the Vanderlyn gang. He ended a lot of lives, and that surely isn't all of them, considering we don't know too much about what he did between joining the gang and where this game picks up. For context, the population of Amarillo, Texas in 1900 was less than Arthur Morgan's total kill count at 1,442. Thanks as always for watching. I'm King Deschain, signing off for now.